How's this?
Oh, nice.
We've got image, we've got sound.
Time's over.
We're ready to go. I hope you enjoyed today's talk. My name is David Kelleher. Website, davidk.net. I am on Joined In. The number of this talk is 8922. I'll have some feedback when we're all done. And today's topic is reverse card sorting. Just want to take a minute or two to introduce myself. I do education, mostly. I teach at colleges in the area. I teach web design, web development. I've developed advanced web development curriculum for a couple of colleges in the area, Emerson College, Boston University Center for Digital and Imaging Arts. I also do teaching all kinds of different media production. Just finished an advanced special effects class, rendering out 3D Maya images, combining that with live action video. So a 5-week workshop over at Emerson. That was a lot of fun. And a current project I'm doing. I do all kinds of crazy things. Taking motion sensors, kind of wire myself up, and I do a little juggling act, and I'm going to feed that data to some electronic musicians who are turning that into music. So that's going to be an interesting project. So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the first web projects I was doing. So I went to school back in the late 90s, to learn how to develop websites. And a few years after that, I started doing projects. And the very first projects I do, they'd be for small organizations, they'd be for nonprofit companies. And they come to me and they'd say, Dave, we need a website. Nobody at our organization can do Photoshop, so we need you to do the design. And nobody knows how to use Front Page or Dreamweaver, so we need you to do the code as well. And then they'd hand me a sitemap. And they'd say, make this. Okay? We want you to make this. And I'd look at their sitemap, and there'd be, I'd see, it's an information architecture exercise. And I'd see some potential problems they'd have with that sitemap that they hand to me. So I try and discuss it with them. I talk about the different issues or the different problems you'd have if they actually went out and built this site. And they look at me kind of funny because they spend a lot of time making these really nice fancy boxes in Microsoft Word or their desktop publishing application. And you're like, we really just want to quote at this point. So a few years later, I started teaching, have students, really excited, come up with great ideas. We do concept developments for the websites. We get to the point where we do the concept development. They hand me the sitemaps, and it's the same thing. So I'll go over their work with them, and I'll tell them, your labels here might not be as clear as they could be, or maybe some of this content doesn't necessarily belong in the group with this other content. And they give me that same look that my clients gave me. Like, you don't know how long I spent making those boxes in my Microsoft Word program. Mm-hmm. And over time, I kind of began to understand why this is happening. And this quote here, I actually wrote that last night. Pretty proud of it. The ease of task does not correlate with the ease of the tool used to complete the task. Okay. So if you don't know Photoshop, if you don't know coding, right? Learning Photoshop is not learning design. Learning how to program, learning Dreamweaver is not learning how to write the code. It's the same with information architecture. Just using Microsoft Word to make your boxes is not really doing information architecture. And the second issue that comes up with is when a programmer doesn't do their job well, everybody immediately knows that there's a problem. Right? So for example, you go to a site, you click on a link, and you get a 404. You immediately can see, even if you know nothing about programming, that there's a problem here. And it's the same with graphic design. If a designer doesn't do their job well, everybody immediately can recognize that and understand that. I'm sorry, fabricland.com.
I see nothing wrong with that page.
Nothing wrong with that page. That's a real site. That's a real site. Yeah, you can go on to fabricland.co.uk, and they sell high-end fabrics for like wedding dresses. Might not guess that. Most students tell me that this looks like a restaurant website, a fast food joint from 1996. McDonald's 1996 website looked a lot like this. So we immediately know when the design is off, when the design doesn't match our expectations or the business goals. You can spot that instantly. And by the way, this their information architecture is to take their 200 pages and list them alphabetically ordered in a left side frame, as also not recommended. Information architecture, however, you do that task, and if there's a problem with it, it's not obvious. You make your chart, you make your sitemap, you look at it, it looks great, and then you move on to the next step. And you don't actually encounter the problems until if you get to user testing, you have your interface built, or you find out later that people are having trouble finding information on your website, or they can't complete tasks as easy as they should. Okay. So this is a talk about information architecture. It's going to be specifically one step, which is reverse card sorting, which is an activity that everybody should do with their projects. Information architecture simply is organizing and labeling your data to enhance findability. So you want to make a sale, somebody comes to your site, they're going to look, if they see what they need, maybe you make the sale, if not, they go somewhere else. So we want this findability for our websites, and information architecture will get us there. So, the first step in the process, when you're doing information architecture, basically designing and organizing your content, is a card sort. And I assume most people are familiar with the card sort exercise. How many know or have done a card sort? Okay. If you haven't, I'm going to show you that website right now. This is websort.net. There's many websites, there's many online tools where you can do this, where you can set up a basic card sort to get, gather information from your users. Got disconnected. And you don't even need a website to do this. You could use a whiteboard, you could use paper, you could use cards. But the reason why I want to show this website, which is websort.net, is they put up an online demo. And this online demo, thank you, will help me make some interesting points. The website is websort.net. Okay. Step one of this process is to just collect all of your content. Here's a demo study I want to show you. And you find users who are in your audience. And you have them take all of your content. In the card sort exercise, you put one piece of content on each card. And you have them sort them into categories that are related. So for example, we have one card here is sauna. So I can just drag that out here. And then it will let me drag other content items into this category. And then up top here, I can create a name or a label for that category. So there's sauna. Let's pick another one. How about racquetball court? If I could put it in here, because these are both things to do. So maybe I have a category called things to do, and I put my sauna in there and my racquetball court in there. Then as I start looking through all my content items, well, pretty much everything on this list is something that you can do. So what I would do is probably need to come up with a more specific category name. Maybe I break this out. I could put like all of the sports down here. So for example, we have tennis courts. Tennis courts definitely feels like it fit with racquetball courts. And you want to go through this list, find groups. When you're finished with your groups, come up with a label for each one of your groups. And you have done a card sort. You have taken all of your category and organized it into groups. The great part about this exercise, at least when you first do it, and usually a good rule of thumb is to get 15 people from your target audience and have them go through this exercise. It's also called an open sort exercise because you're not giving them the categories, You're letting them choose the categories yourself. And this open source, this open card exercise, there are no wrong answers. You just want their initial reaction. You want to have them look at the content, figure out how it's organized. And then you can come and say you're done. All this spa, all the sports. And after you have your 15 or so users complete this card sorting exercise, you can go see a report. And I'm going to select all the users who have participated in this demo so we can take a quick look at the reports. What you're going to see are the labels that different people created, and you're also going to see how they categorize information. So which cards did most users put together? Here's one report called a tree graph, which is really useful. And so this is going to sort all of the items, and it's going to try and group them together. And users aren't always going to agree on what the group should be. They're going to agree on a lot of things, and some of them they're not necessarily going to agree with. So here we have, reservations, room plans, resort maps. Resort maps and resort directions have a short connection here in the tree, so they're very, very tightly related. And room floor plans was also put kind of in this grouping area, but not always, so not all users agreed with that. So when we're kind of dividing up our content into different categories, it's helpful to kind of look at the tree and see which ones are put together. I want to show one specific user here. See if I can find this user. So we can also look at reports to see what each individual user did. So we have categories, for example, water sports, other sports, tours, relaxation, fun things to do. We're not necessarily going to trust the users. We want to certainly get our ideas of how our users are thinking about the content and how they would look for and organize the content themselves. But there could be some issues here. For example, there's a category called front desk. There's certain things you would expect to find at a front desk. For example, like if you wanted a map of the area. You're at the resort, you probably go down and pick up a map at the front desk. Or that's not really going to work for our website. One of the key things to do when you're coming up with groups and category labels, and you'll hear this everywhere, is that they have to be user-centered. Your groups should help people find the information they need. Your category groups should help them solve tasks. And if you're organizing your content in a way that isn't assisting your users solve problems, if you're not organizing your content in a way that assists your users in solving problems, then you're not going to have a very useful website. So, grouping things based on the departments at your organization is not a good idea, especially if somebody has a task where they need to go to 5 different departments to complete their task. You don't want to just copy that organization to your website. Same thing, physical locations. If you were actually at the resort, you would go to the front desk to do some things, and you would go somewhere else, to complete other tasks. We don't want to copy that for the web. What we want to do is we want to copy the organization in a way that people are going to, browse the web. We want to put them in categories that make sense for the tasks that they're trying to do. So here's some tips I have for you. Actually, these are potential issues that can come up in this process, right? So you're making your categories and your labels based on information you've gathered from the users and decisions you make yourself about the best way to make these groupings to help your users. And to find problems with information architecture online was not very hard. I could go to even the most prestigious, most famous resort sites and was very easily able to spot problems with their information architecture. Literally every single site I went to had some mistakes in this area. You can see they spent money on their design. You can see everything's functioning correctly, but they missed some aspects of doing good information architecture. Labels that are unclear. Here are the labels they have on their websites. Resorts, activities, for everyone, weddings and honeymoons, deals, and book online. Some of these are very clear. Activities, these are things I can do. Weddings and honeymoons, well, I know if I'm going to get married, that's the page I want to go to. You want deals, you want to book online, I understand exactly what those labels mean. Then there's one called the resorts. And I looked at that label and I wondered what is actually going to be there? Because isn't the entire website about your resorts? It turned out it's kind of like a landing page for each one of their different locations. So maybe I would have chosen a label that, for example, that said locations. That would have more clearly, more specifically said what the content in that group was about. They have another one here called For Everyone. Also, I wasn't really sure what that meant. I thought maybe, well, these are some activities at the resorts that everybody would enjoy. It turns out For Everyone is part of their branding, resorts for everyone. They decided to be clever and just put that in the navigation. It turns out that they actually did a great thing here. They've broken out their audience into all the different groups. Families, kids, parents, couples, friends, groups. And they've created pages and content specifically for each one of those groups. That's very user-centered design. That's great content to have on your website. The problem is the label isn't really clear, so I don't really understand what this section of information is. This is navigation design, which is a separate step than doing your information architecture. You have lots of content, like the different activities you can do. One way to organize your activities would be based on which locations offer which activities. Another way to organize it is based on which activities would appeal to different demographics in your target audience. And so what you do is you're creating multiple paths or multiple navigation paths through your menus to your content. And that's actually a good thing. That can be good navigation design. But we still have to start out with clear content buckets that have clear labels. Another problem I have with this is you have this For Everyone section and then weddings and honeymoons. So for example, it says like, everyone, come here, come to this page. We have something for everyone. Yeah, but if you are going to get married, you want to go over there. Okay. This is a About Us label, which I've never liked, because really isn't everything on your website about your company or your organization. So I lost this battle. I've been arguing since I started teaching, website design and information architecture many, many years ago, not to use an About Us label because it's vague. It doesn't really say what's there. However, millions and millions and millions of websites have done this. And what has happened now, we're conditioned to expect certain pieces of information in the About Us category. Other ways to contact you, your history, maps, directions, awards, news, press releases, other audiences like corporate audiences or getting jobs. We've just come to expect this information in the About Us. So this will pass your usability tests, because if people are looking for directions, somebody will immediately click on the About Us link to find them. However, it's still not good information design. What it is it works because over time it's become a convention. And we've redefined the word about. So that when people see it on the web, it's no longer the dictionary definition that you see in the book. The word About Us has a new meaning now on the context of websites based on what people have done over and over again during the years. You've got to be careful not to let that section become a catch-all section for content where you didn't know exactly where to put. Then what you end up with is orphan content or pages that people will never be able to find. Orphan pages, you probably may have heard this as a developer, you have a page, but no links coming to that page, and nobody can ever get to that page. That content doesn't exist on your web, even if it's on your server. If you put a piece of information in a category where it doesn't really belong, nobody's going to know to click on the menu to find it. So it might as well be orphan content. People will never see it. So this resort here, first of all, there's lots of issues with this one. They have things like hours of operation and the day's weather report. That's not really about planning your trip. That might be planning your trip would be where I would expect to see that information. So I think that some content is actually not grouped where it should be. But here we have like mobile apps down at the bottom on the left. This is something they added to their site and they didn't know where to put it. So let's just stick it in this bucket over here because it's such a vague term, the mountain, which covers everything. We can just put it there because it fits, right? However, if you look at this navigation here, you would never know they had a mobile app. This is a mobile app that lets you track your runs down the mountain, which is pretty cool. But it doesn't really have anything to do with anything else in this section here. So that's another problem you could have. And here's another one. Categories which are too broad and overlap. This is the opposite problem. On the last slide, we had a piece of content and it didn't go anywhere. Here we have a piece of content and it goes in two different categories. Well, where do you put it? So as a information architect, people usually just say, oh, I'll stick it here. The problem with this is your users, when they're trying to complete tasks, if the content could fit in two different places, for example, lessons and rentals is really a thing to do. We talked about the problem with this wording, thing to do. Somebody might come to click on a category and they won't know which one. They'll hesitate. It'll take them a while. They might click on the wrong one. And if they fail at their task or take a while, then you begin to lose sales. The effectiveness of your site decreases. So here we have, under lessons and rental, cruiser bikes, which are just not mountain bikes you ride on the mountain, but bikes you could rent just to ride around town. That really is a thing to do. And if you clicked on thing to do, you wouldn't know that you could get these bikes to just ride around town because this content isn't listed under here. Also things like getting guides and tours, not listed under things to do. So we have two opposite problems, when your content doesn't fit anywhere and when your content could fit in two different places. Okay. You need to look for these problems when you do your organization of categories. Create your content groups that align with user tasks and have clear specific labels. And second, make sure that each item fits in one and only one group. Kind of like a rule of thumb. When I'm checking my work after I do information architecture, I check for these two things. Does my categories and labels help users find content and create tasks? And did each piece of content fit in exactly one of my content buckets? Okay. At this point, you've checked your work and it looks good. Chances are it's not perfect and that they're probably made a mistake. There could be some issues. If you're writing code and this code is controlling a nuclear reactor, you wouldn't just look at it and say, oh, I think that's okay. I'll go upload it to their server now. Same thing with information architecture. You don't just look at your sitemap and say, wow, it's a nice looking sitemap with nice boxes. You want to make sure that you don't have any of those problems. And it can be really difficult to identify these things when you're just looking at a sitemap. So I found this activity. It's been around for a long time. It's called reverse card sorting. Remember that. That's today's talk. That's why I'm here. Reverse card sorting takes this problem of trying to find errors in your design, your information design, and turns it into a game. It's really simple. It's 4 steps to play. And I will do this with my students, when we're actually building websites in a workshop format. I don't tell them what we're doing. I just tell them to turn off their computers. And I hand out cards, and I hand out magic markers, and then I have them do their content. I have them come up with their categories. There's your content cards. You have them sort, just like with the card sort. Come up with categories. So I have dining has coffee shop, fine dining, casual restaurants, services, room service, daycare, internet access, activities, tennis, rock climbing, and snorkeling. And then you shuffle your cards, and you hand them to somebody else. And I wouldn't tell my students that part was coming. We do this offline. There are online ways of doing this, but it's not just testing information design. When you do this online, there is an interface and there is navigation. We want to do a test that is only going to test information architecture. And it's amazing. You think you might have the best organized set of cards, you're really proud of your work, and you hand them to somebody else and they'll start trying to put it back the way that you originally created it. So they ideally will go back and do this. It never actually works that way. They'll separate out the category cards, and some of the cards they'll very quickly figure out which content it should go, which content group it belongs in. And then there'll be a card where they hold it up and they look at it kind of funny. And you've got a problem. And one of 3 things has happened, and these are the problems we talked about with the resort sites. Either you have an unclear label, and they didn't know what that label really meant. And in that case, they'll have no idea what cards should go in that category. Or they'll have a card that doesn't really fit anywhere. So they'll either just, after a while, just stick it somewhere or set it off to the side. Or finally, they'll have trouble choosing between 2 different categories. And you watch them do this, so you see exactly where the problems with your design are. You ask them questions. Why didn't you know where this card went? And then you figure out if you have overlapping categories or orphan content, and you figure out a solution. Maybe you group your cards a little differently. Maybe you come up with a different label that's more specific so they don't overlap. For people who have done this, this is a test that you may have heard of. This is done more often than reverse card sorting. It's called tree test. And what it does is basically the same thing. It takes your content groupings, it attaches it to a navigation. So you give people a task, and you have them click through that task, through the, to complete that task, click through the menus, and they have to identify where in the menus you think that they would click to complete that task. So here, what would you do? If you want to transfer your phone and internet to your new address from the home page, you'd probably click on internet. Then what would you click on next? 3G broadband plans or coverage map. And you can find out what people click on, and hopefully, if you've done everything well, they'll click on the right section to complete the task that you've created. So now this test doesn't test just purely information architecture. The benefit of this is it works for deep sites if you have multiple level of hierarchies. So tree test is useful for that. And it's also more task oriented. It's always good, not just about findability, this is about completing tasks. So I recommend doing both, reverse card sorting and a tree test. Well, that's it. So we'll, yeah, definitely time for questions.
So I work with a lot of form data,
Okay.
form-based, we are collecting a lot of input from users. How would you apply this to like form labels?
So you're talking about like
hundreds of fields, right?
Right.
And they all have labels, some better than the others, some more complex, some not very specific at all.
Yeah.
So let's say I want to do some sort of grouping on this, or
yeah, this actually reverse card sorting applies to any information architecture activity. Like the menus for software, desktop applications, forms, same thing. Just make a card for each one of your forms, and you can do the exact same thing. Figure out which ones are grouped together. You go through the steps of the card sorting, have your users test it. You make guesses about which form fields belong together. Then each group of form fields is going to have like its own legend. And so what you do is that legend is going to be your label for that section. And you want to do the same thing. You want to make sure that those legends are clear and specific and easily understood, and that every form field belongs in a category, and it makes sense that that field belongs in exactly that category. So I think you would go through that exact same step. This is, remember, it's a paper, it's a card exercise. It has nothing to do with interfaces or navigation or visual design. It's only thinking about content in terms of how it's organized. So it absolutely would work for forms. Any other questions?
This reverse card sorting, is this for offline user, like creating the project?
Yeah.
And that's you and your team making it, or it's like you making a way that online users will be able to work for you actually?
The reverse card sorting I always do offline. So actually another name for it is a closed card sort. You might hear that term as well. So the open card sort, you could do it online or offline. I always do the reverse card sorting offline because, again, it isolates your information design. And yeah, you want to have users do that. You could do it yourself. You could have somebody who's a team member do it. But you do want to have, and even just a few people who are in your target audience who use the website to do this exercise without knowing anything about the work you did to get there, to verify it. And yeah, do it online, do it with paper cards. Yes?
You have a case where you're doing testing with lots of potential users, you're getting all sorts of varying results with no consistency. Do you ever consider anything else other than like a static lab, like is there any other solutions or ways to approach it?
So other options besides static now, that's actually a good point. If you struggle with the information design, if you have problems with your information design, a lot of people try to fix that with their navigation. And at some point there are going to be ambiguous, there are going to be very, very hard to resolve things, and the navigation can help with that. But the goal, what I'm really explaining right here is just try and get it as good as you possibly can. Even if it's not perfect, try and get it as good as you possibly can. And just, I have a book to give away, and I have a question to ask about that. Because no matter what you do, something will always turn up. Some problem, some ambiguous thing that you hadn't expected. I created this little example here, and I thought that I'd come up with the perfect example where it'd be very clear which cards belong in which categories. Coffee shop, fine dining, and casual restaurants under dining. Room service, daycare, internet access under service. Tennis, rock climbing, snorkeling under activities. But I found an ambiguous card that could fit in more than one categories. And for the book, room service. Yeah. Room service, it's an amenity, it's a service, but you could also consider that to be a dining option. And I looked at this morning and I'm going like, I'm just like everybody here. I do my card sorting, I can identify problems, but it's just as hard for me to do this sorting as it is for everybody else.
Some might consider internet access and activity also.
Yeah.
I know my kids would.
Exactly.
On the internet.
Exactly. So again, that's why you do the open card sorts with your users, because you want to find out how your users think about these. How they would group
I
things
wouldn't
together.
do it that way, but I know my kids would.
So you
That's
find out,
activity.
exactly. If you're doing your website for kids, put it under activities. If you do your website for the parents, put it under services. It depends on your audience, how members in your audience would try to find things, how they would try to complete tasks. Different demographics work in different ways. And you have to capture that in this process.
If we take one of those ambiguous cards, say, let's talk about the room service.
Yep.
Would it be considered a bad design from a navigation perspective to have that same page available?
Yeah, you can. That's a solution. You know, at some point, you know, you can't necessarily make everything perfect. There's always going to be a percentage of people who will think differently than other members. So that's when you have things like crosslinks, or you know, when you design the navigation, you map your information design to the navigation. You want to sort of catch those kind of exceptions, or those ambiguous cards, or you know, things that people might go to multiple places to look for, or different paths through your application. You can absolutely think about how you can do that during your navigation stage. Yes.
In lieu of going with an about in your main app, what's your solution?
Well, it depends specifically. It depends specifically on your business and what content is actually in there. So, you know, find out if you have a, you know, our location, you know, or it might be if you have maps, directions, and hours. Visit us might be a good term for that. It's really going to depend on what content is in that category. And you might have multiple categories, so you might break up some of these things into like a contact, and then some might go into another bucket. And then when you actually design your pages, some of these sections or content buckets might be so small, they might end up on the same page. That's okay. You know, as long as you have clear information design and clear navigation paths to get to everything. You know, it would be okay to have a page with all of your About Us stuff on it. But again, just choosing the label that best describes what actual content you have. It's business specific and it's content specific.
How do you feel about redundancy? Like if something can go in two places, you
Yep.
think it's
Like they did with beaches. They had multiple paths to their activities, depending if you're coming through it as like a member of a user audience versus, you know, coming through it to see what they had at specific locations. So again, that's a navigation design exercise to make sure you do that well, so that people can find the path through the content. But yeah, the redundancy shouldn't exist in your information architecture. You do your best to group things together. Then when you step to navigation design, then it's okay to have redundant paths. Yep, that's how I would explain that. Okay, it's time to go. I've been teaching. I do trying to put some of my training online. I've been doing this in many different areas for about 20 years. So I have some cards with some access to some training materials that are designed to show insight about the concepts behind all this stuff. So feel free to come up and get a card. We're out of time. I can step here for a few minutes if there's any more questions. Thank you very much.
We're going to be having a snack break on the first floor.